Welcome back everyone. As in the last video we created the front end part of our this project. So in this video we will be working on with creating the database, and then we will create our backend, and then we will connect it all together, and at the last we will have our full project ready. So in this video, I will walk you through the process of creating the database on AWS RDS, and then we will create the tables on MySQL Workbench, and we will also connect the Workbench and AWS RDS. Then we will create the backend. So let's start with this video. So now we are going to use the Amazon RDS to create a MySQL database instance, and this is going to be free tier eligible, so you do not need to worry about the cost. So open the AWS Management Console, sign up with your account, and then make sure that you have necessary permission to use these services. Then when you are signed in to your account, in the search bar over here, you have to search for RDS, okay? And over here, you have to select this option, and then it is going to take you to Amazon RDS page. And over here, you have to select the database option. Then let's click on Create Database. We are going to create a new database. In the database creation method, you have to click on Standard Create. Then in the engine option, you have to select MySQL, okay? Move ahead, and then in the template section, we are going to go with the free tier. Then let's move ahead. Now we have to name our DB instance. So I'm going to go with few learns. Then let's scroll down ahead. We have to create our master username for this database. I'm just going to give it as few learns. Then here you have two options. Either you can auto generate your password or provide the password yourself. So here I have provided my password for the database. Then let's scroll down ahead, and here make sure that you are in db.t3 micro, which is going to provide you 2 virtual CPUs, 1 GB RAM, okay? Then let's move ahead. In the storage section, you should have a storage type of general purpose SSD, and then allocated storage should be 20. Then over here, let's open this storage auto scaling, and here we have to disable the storage auto scaling because we do not want AWS to auto scale our database, okay? Then in the connectivity section, it should be left to default, which is don't connect to an EC2 compute resource. Then you should have the default VPC for you, default subnet group for you, and in public access we have to have public access selected yes. And then in VPC security group you have to select create new VPC. Now either you can provide the security group name or leave it to default. Then let's scroll down, open this additional configuration, and here you will have this database port which is at 3306. So make sure of this. Then in the database authentication, we should have selected password authentication. In monitoring, leave it to default. Then open this additional configuration. Here we have to provide the initial database name. So I'm going to go with few learns. Scroll down. In the backup retention period, you should have 1 day selected over here, and then move ahead, and at the last we will have this create database button. Let's click on it, and it has started creating our database named few learns. So till the time it is creating our database few learns, I'm going to tell you the prerequisites that you will be needing to follow along with this video. So you should have MySQL server installed on your computer, and then you are also going to need MySQL Workbench because you are also going to create the tables in it for our database. So select your operating system, OS version, and then click on download, okay? So these are the two prerequisites. You should also have Node.js and NPM installed. So yes, these are going to be the prerequisites that you are going to need. Okay, let's head back over here, and it is still creating our database. So let's wait for a moment. And yes, our database is successfully created, and you can see the status over here which is saying backing up, okay? Now let's click on our few learns database. Now in this page, this is the thing that we need to connect to MySQL Workbench with AWS RDS. This basically endpoint and port. So let's now open MySQL Workbench and connect database with AWS RDS. So over here I have opened the Workbench app, and here at the top navigation you will find the option to connect the database. Click on the database and then click on connect to database. Let's head to our database at AWS, grab this endpoint, okay, and then in the host name provide the endpoint. Perfect. Provide the username that you gave for this host name or this database. So for me it was few learns, and then we have to provide the password, and here I have provided the password for my few learns database, and then I'm going to click on OK. Once it is done, then click on OK, and it is going to start our SQL editor, and it might take few moments, so let's wait for this. And after it is done opening the editor, you will be taken to this administration panel, and then you are going to look over at schemas, and here we will have our database, and you can see over here that it was fetching the tables, views, store procedure. And now over here we can create our tables and insert data and run queries. But before doing that, we need to specify which database that we are talking about. So over here, we are going to say we will be using few learns with the command use and then our database name, which is few learns. And then over here, you will have this icon. We are going to click on it and we will use this database. And in this action output, you can see that this command was run successfully. And now over here, first we will create a table to store all the information about the courses, and this is going to be named courses. In here we are going to have ID, name, description, Vimeo video ID, syllabus, instructor's bio, testimonials. So the ID over here is the primary key for the tables, which will automatically increment for each course. And once we are done, we will hit that icon again, and down in the action output you will see that it has created our table. And when we refresh it, in the table section over here you will see a table named courses, and inside it we will have the columns with all of the fields that we declared over here. And now we are going to create the user table, which stores all the user data. Here we have the ID, username, email, password, and refresh token. Here we will hit this icon once again, and in the action output you can see the table was created successfully. And when we refresh this, in the table section over here we are going to look at the users table. Inside this, we are going to have the columns inside which we will have all of the fields that we declared into the editor. And now we will create the purchased course table, which is going to keep all of the purchased courses the user have bought. Here we have ID, user, email, course ID, okay? Then let's hit this icon again. And over here, you can see that the table was created successfully, and then refresh the tables once again. And here we should have our purchased courses table too. And there we have this. And inside the columns, we will have ID, user ID, email, course ID, okay? And now if you want to check our tables, we have a command which is going to be select asterisk from users, and there we should have the tables described over here. You can see ID, username, email, password, and refresh token. Similarly, like users, you can look at the tables of courses and purchased courses. And there we have the table for courses, okay? Now let's check for the purchased courses. And then let's hit this icon once again. And there we have the purchased course table too. And for the Vimeo video ID, you have to visit your Vimeo application where you are going to upload your videos. And over here in this link, when you upload the video, you get this number in the URL. So this is what your Vimeo video ID will be, okay? So grab this Vimeo video ID, and into the database you can just double click on it and update your Vimeo video ID to whatever ID is yours, alright? And then you have to click on apply, and then it is going to run these commands to execute the statement to update your Vimeo video ID. Then click on apply. It is executing the SQL statement, and once it is done, close this tab. And there are updated Vimeo video IDs, okay? And once we are done with our database, now we are going to look over at backend project structure, because understanding how the project is organized will make it much easier for you to follow along as we build our backend. So here is what our backend project directory looks like. Here's what our backend project directory looks like. We have several folders and files, each serving a specific purpose. So let's go through them one by one to get the better understanding. First of all, we have the config folder in which we have the database file. This will be responsible for setting up and managing our connection to MySQL database. Then we have the controllers folder. This is where all the core logic of our application will reside. Each controller file will correspond to a specific part of our application. So, for example, Auth Controller file will handle all the authentication related tasks like registering new users or logging them in, while the course controller file will manage the operation related to the courses such as adding or retrieving course details. Moving on, we have the middlewares folder. In the middleware folder, we just have one file, which is AuthenticateToken, which is going to check if the user is authorized to access certain routes, adding a layer of security to our application. Then we have the routes folder. This folder is going to map our HTTP request to specific controller function. So, for example, Auth Route file is going to define the routes for authentication, right? So it will link them to the appropriate function which is going to be defined in Auth Controller file. Next we have the services folder, which has two files, Stripe client and Vimeo client. Stripe client is going to be used for handling payment with Stripe, and Vimeo client is going to be used for fetching videos from our Vimeo app. And at last we have the server file, which is going to be basically the entry point of our backend application. Here we are going to bring in all the necessary middleware, connect the routes and everything. So now let's set up our environment. By environment, I mean let's bring in all of the API keys that we will be needing to work on with backend. So as for the database, I already told you so, the DB host is going to be the endpoint for our database. Head over to the AWS console, and over here this is the endpoint that I am talking about. So let's grab this, and then in the DB host, let's provide this endpoint. Username was fewlearns, right? Then the password was fewlearns-password. And the database name was same as fewlearns. Now we have to generate the JWT secret key and refresh secret key. Secret key, this is going to be used to sign the JWT tokens for authentication, whereas refresh secret key is going to sign the refresh tokens to maintain user sessions. And to generate these keys, we have a command. So let's open another terminal over here, and then we are going to run this command, which is going to give us 256-bit key. Let's then hit enter. So this is the key over here. Let's grab this and paste it into the secret key section. Then once again, we are going to run this command to bring in the refresh secret key. Let's do it. Let's run this, and over here we have another key. Grab it, paste it into the refresh secret key section. So basically this command generates a 64-character hexadecimal string, which is a 256-bit key. And now we have to bring in the Stripe secret key. For it, we have to visit the Stripe website. Let's head over to the Stripe website, and over here make sure that you are into the test mode. Then go to the API key section. Over here we are going to have two keys, publishable key and a secret key. So we need this. So over here we have to click on reveal secret key or test key, and then let's grab this, head back to the VS Code, and over here provide the secret key. And now we need to bring in the client ID, secret and access token from Vimeo. So basically, first of all, we have to create an application on Vimeo. So let's head over to the Vimeo website. For it, you have to visit this website, which is developer.vimeo.com/apps, and then over here click on create app. So here you have to give in the app name. I'm going to go with few learns. Then you have to provide the brief description. Then it asks if people beside us will be able to access our application. We have to click on yes. Then let's check this box so that we agree that our application does not violate the Vimeo API license agreement. Then click create app, and now it is going to take you to this page. Here you have this client ID. Grab this, head back to the VS Code, paste the client ID over here, head back again to the Vimeo app, scroll down, then in the authentication section, you have two, authenticated, unauthenticated. We are going to go with authenticated. Then in the scopes, we are going to click on private and video files. Then here we will click on generate personal access token, and here it has provided us the token. So let's grab this, copy this in VS Code, paste the access token over here. Then we have to bring in the client secret, which is this. So let's copy this too, and then over here let's paste it just like this. And then we have this client URL. This is the URL for our front-end application, and you can see over here that the application is running on localhost 5173. If the port for you is different, replace it over here. And like that is what we are going to have for the env file. We have all of the keys that we need to work with our backend. So let's now save this file. Now the next thing is to install all of the dependencies that we need to work with backend. So over here, let's first navigate to the server folder, and if you don't have this package.json file, it's perfectly fine. Run the command npm init-y to initialize backend as our Node.js server. And like these are all of the dependencies that we need: bcrypt, body parser, course.env, express, JSON web token, MySQL 2, NodeMon, Stripe, and Vimeo. Then let's hit enter and let it install all of the dependency. By the time, open the package.json file, and in here we are going to add a script so that our server starts with NodeMon. And here we have all of the dependency. Then let's add another script, and let's say NodeMon server.js, not index but server. And then let's save this file. So to give you a quick overview of what all of these are doing over here, Express is going to be the web server framework. Okay, it is going to handle the HTTP request and define routes easily. MySQL 2 is going to allow us to connect to our MySQL database and perform SQL queries. Then we have .env, which we are going to use to load the environment variables from the .env file into the process.env. Then we have the course, which stands for cross-origin resource sharing. This is a security feature that allows us to control which domain can access our backend server. Then we have the bcrypt. This is the library for hashing password, making sure our user password are securely stored into the database. Then we have the body parser, which is used to parse the incoming request body in the middleware before the request is handled by the actual route handler. So yes, now once we have installed all of the dependencies and our environment variables are also set up, let's work with backend. But before that, let's save this file and make sure that this .env file is secure. How we can do so is in the gitignore file. Here we have to add .env file so that it does not get published or committed to our GitHub repository. Okay, so let's now save this file too. Now we are going to work with our server.js file. So in this file, we first off require .env to load our environment variables from the env file. Then we bring in express to create a server and course to handle the cross-origin request. Then we import initialize connection function from our database file, which we are yet to create. Okay, this initialize connection function we will be using to connect to our MySQL database. Then we set up our middleware. We use express.json to parse the incoming JSON request, which makes it easier for us to work with the data sent from the front end. Then we have the course middleware, which is going to be configured to allow requests from our front end application running on 5173. In here, we are also specifying the HTTP methods that are allowed, which is going to be get and post, and the headers that are allowed. Next, we import all of our routes file. In the routes folder, we have these different files, so we are importing them over here. Then we set up the actual route for our server. Each app.use function is going to tell the Express to use a particular route file whenever a request is made to the specific endpoint. So, for example, all authentication related requests will go to the auth route. Okay? So like this is going to be something like this /auth. We don't have sign up, but we have register. So like this and this, just for an example. Okay, let me just remove this. And at last, we initialize the connection to our MySQL database using initialize connection function. If the connection is successful, we are going to start the server on the specific port, which is either the value coming from env file or 3000 by default. And if there's any error connecting to the database, we are going to log the error to the console. And now that we have set up our server, it's time to connect our backend to the SQL database. So we will be using MySQL 2 package to handle the database connection in Node.js. So in the database.js file, we start by requiring MySQL 2/promise, which is a promise-based version of MySQL 2 for easier handling of asynchronous operation. Then we define an asynchronous function, which is called initialize connection, so that it can establish the connection to the database. And inside this function, we use the MySQL.createConnection method to create a new connection to the database. We are passing an object that contains the necessary details like host, user, password, and database. All these values are being pulled from our env file, which we set up earlier. And once the connection is successful, we are going to log a message to the console confirming the connection to our database. But if there's any error connecting to the database, we catch it using the try catch block. We are going to log the error to the console for basically debugging purposes, and it is going to ensure that if there's an issue, it won't get unnoticed, so we can handle it immediately. And finally, at last, we export our initialize connection using the module export so that it can be imported into our server.js file. Now that it is done, we have to make sure or test our database connection. And now this is done, we have to test our database connection and even make sure our MySQL server is running. And now here we are going to navigate into the server folder, and then we are going to run the command npm start to start our server. And here we should get the message that says connected to Fuelon's database and server is running on port 3000. So that means our server and database are working perfectly fine and they are connected to our database. Okay. Alright, and now it's time that we handle user authentication in our backend. So in this step, we will implement our authentication logic, which is going to include the user's registration, login, and token-based authentication. We will also be working in our Auth Controller file and also set up a middleware to protect these routes. So open the Auth Controller JS file present into the controllers file. And in here, we first import the bcrypt for hashing password and JSON web token for handling the JWTs. We also require initialize connection function so that we can connect to the database, and we bring in our .env to load our environment variables. Then we also bring in the secret key and refresh secret key from our env file. Next, we create the register function, which is going to handle user registration. In here, we hash the password using bcrypt to securely store it into the database. We then also use SQL query to insert the new user into the users table that we created. If everything goes smoothly, we are going to send a success message back to the client saying user registered successfully. But if there is any error, we are going to log it into the console saying error during registration and whatever the error will be. And we are going to send a status of 500 showing error registering user. Then we have the login function which is going to handle the user login. In here, we first start off by checking if user exists into our database. And if user is found, we are going to use bcrypt.compare to verify the password. And if the password matches, we are going to generate a JWT and refresh token using JSON Web Token. The JWT here will be used to authenticate future requests, and the refresh token will allow us to generate a new JWT when the current one expires. We are also storing the refresh token into the database for added security. And during this process, if there is any error, we are going to console log it and send a status of 500 saying error logging in. Then we have our refresh token function, which is going to help us generate a new JWT when the old one expires. In here, we first verify that the provided refresh token using the JWT verify, and if it is valid, we are going to generate a new JWT and send it back to the user. But if the refresh token is invalid or expired, we are going to return a 403 status with an appropriate error message. And lastly, we have our protected route, which is going to be like an example of secured endpoint that only authenticated user can have access to. And now to secure our routes, we need a middleware to authenticate JWT. So let's open AuthenticateToken file. So in this file, we first start off by requiring the JSON Web Token. Then we create the AuthenticateToken function, inside which we are going to check for a token in the authorization header. And if the token is found, we verify it using the JSON Web Token. And if the token is found, we verify it using the JSON Web Token. If the token is valid, we store the decoded user object into the request and call the next to proceed. And if not, we return an appropriate HTTP status code of 403. And at last, we export this function to use it as a middleware in our routes. It's that simple, okay? So basically, this middleware will help us protect routes by ensuring that only authenticated user can access them. So now that we have implemented our authentication logic and created the middleware to secure our routes, in the next step, we are going to create the routes that will handle these authentication requests. So for it, we have to work with Auth Route file. But before that, let's save this file too and open the Auth Routes file. Here, basically, we are going to link each route to its corresponding function in our Auth Controller file. So in this file, we first start off by importing Express and creating a router instance. We also import our Auth Controller, which contains all of the authentication logic we wrote earlier. Additionally, we also bring in our AuthenticateToken middleware to protect the routes that require the user to be authenticated. Next up, we define all of our routes. So we start with the register route, which uses the register function from the Auth Controller to handle the user registration. All the routes are going to be post request because we are sending data to the server. Next, we have the login route. This is also the post request, and this calls the login function from the Auth Controller. This login route checks if user's credentials are valid, then it returns a JWT for the user to use it into the subsequent request. Then we have the refresh route, which is another post request that handles the refreshing the user's JWT. Lastly, we have the protected route. And finally, at last, we export our router so that it could be used into the server file. And that is what we will have for this file. So let's now save the file, and in the server file we have to uncomment this out because we are done with creating the authentication related routes, okay? And then save the server file. So now that we have set up our authentication route, it's time that we move on to creating the course management side of our backend. So we will implement a feature that is going to allow us to retrieve the detailed information about a specific course from our database. So open the course controller file. This is going to be essential for providing users with all the necessary details about the course that they are interested in. So in this file, we bring in the initialize connection function from our database file. Then we create an asynchronous get course detail function. In this function, we are using the request params.id to get the course ID from the URL. And over here, we establish a connection to our database and execute a SQL query to fetch the course detail. And if no course is found with the given ID, we are going to return a status of 400 with a message saying course not found. But if we do get the course detail, then we are going to return it into the JSON format. And that is what we will have for this file. And now we need to set up a route that is going to handle the request for the course detail. So for it, we have to open the course route file. In the course route file, we import the express and create the router instance. We are also bringing in the course controller that we just set up. Next, we are defining a route for get request to get the course with the particular ID. This ID is a placeholder for the actual course ID that will be passed in the request URL. This route is going to call the getCourseDetail function from our controller to fetch and return the course detail. So let's now save the file, and just like how we did for our authentication route, we need to hook up a course route into the server file, and we already have it. So just we have to uncomment this out, okay? And then let's save this file too. Now we move on with creating an important feature of our online learning platform, which is going to be fetching course content. And this step is going to ensure that the user can access the course materials that they have purchased. So for it, we will be working with the course content controller file. And in this file, we first off start off by importing the initialize connection function from the database config file. Then we create an asynchronous function that is get course content, which is going to take the request and response. Inside this function, we retrieve the username from the request user object, which will be populated by our authentication middleware. And we also bring in the course ID from the request parameter. Then we are going to have the SQL query, which is important because it selects all of the necessary fields such as course name, description, video ID, syllabus, instructor's bio, and testimonials from the courses table. This query joins the purchased courses and the users table to ensure that the users requesting the content has indeed purchased the course. And the query uses the placeholder like question mark for the username and the course ID to prevent SQL injection and enhance security. And then into the try statement, we initialize a connection to the database and execute the SQL query using the username and course ID as parameters. If the query returns no result, it means either the course does not exist or the user haven't purchased the course yet, and we respond with a 404 status. And if the course content is found, we log a success message and return the course content into the JSON format. And that is what we will have for this file. But at last, we also bring in the catch statement to catch the error if there are any. And then save the file, and now let's set up a route to handle the request for course content. So for it, open this course content routes file. So in this file, as always, we bring in the course content controller and AuthenticateToken middleware, and this route is going to listen for get request to the course content /ID, this one. And it first runs the AuthenticateToken middleware to ensure that the user is logged in. And if the token is valid, we are going to call in the get course content from the course content controller file to fetch the requested course content. And that is what we will have for this file. And let's now save this file too. And in the server file, let's undo this comment and then save the server file. And now we are going to add a powerful powerful feature to our application, which is integrating a checkout process using Stripe. This will allow user to make the secure payments for our courses. So we will be focusing on checkout controller and connecting it to backend. So open the checkout controller file. In this file, we will manage the checkout process, ensuring that user can purchase courses through a seamless Stripe integration. So first we import our Stripe client, which we are basically yet to create from the services directory, and then we even bring in the initialize connection function from our database configuration. These are going to help us interact with Stripe and our SQL database respectively. Next, we define a helper function which is check purchased course, which will verify if a user have already purchased any of the selected course. This function essentially checks the purchase courses table to see if the user have already bought any of the course that they are trying to purchase again. And if they have already bought a course, we are going to return a message saying purchased courses and whatever the IDs of that courses will be. And then we have the store item. This is going to map course IDs to their prices and name in cents, and we will use this to create the line items for the checkout session with Stripe. Then we create the create checkout session function. Inside it, we extract the user ID from the authenticated request. And if the user ID is missing, we are going to throw an error, ensuring that only authenticate user can create a checkout session. And then we check if any of the selected courses have already been purchased using the check purchased course function. And if they have already purchased the course, we are going to send a message which is going to say you have already purchased courses with the IDs, whatever the IDs will be. Then we construct an array of line items for Stripe using the course detail provided into the request body. Each line item is going to include the price, product data, and the quantity. And if there are no line items, we are going to throw an error saying no valid items found for checkout. Then this stripe.checkout.session.create function is going to create a new checkout session. And this session includes a success URL and the cancel URL, directing users to the appropriate page after a successful or cancel payment is done. And during any of this process, if there's an error, we are going to console log it and send a status of 500 with whatever the error will be. Now let's connect this functionality to a route in checkout route file. So in this file, we bring express, router, checkout controller, and authenticate token at first, and then we set up a post route for create checkout session. This route is also going to use the middleware to ensure that the user is authenticated before they create a checkout session, and if authentication is successful, we are going to invoke the create checkout session function from the checkout controller file. And then in the server file, let's uncomment this because we are also done with creating the checkout route. Okay, and save the file. And now let's set up the Stripe client and configure our checkout route. So in this file, we start by requiring the Stripe, and we bring in the Stripe API key from the env file. And at last, we finally export the Stripe client or instance so that it can be easily imported and used into the other parts of our application, particularly into the controllers while we created checkout session. So basically, this is the file which will be responsible for initializing and exporting our Stripe client, which will be used throughout this application to handle the payments. Okay? And yes, this is what we will have for this Stripe client file. And let me just close all of these files. Now, these are the 3 routes that we are yet to work with. For videos, to bring in the Vimeo video, purchase to bring in the purchased course routes, then store purchase to store the course that the user have purchased. So let's start with the purchased route. So this is the feature which is going to allow the user to view all of the courses that they have purchased. First thing first, we bring in the initialize connection function from our database file. Then we create an asynchronous function which is get purchased courses, which is going to take request and response. Inside this function, we extract the username from the request body. or the request user object, which will be populated by the authentication middleware. So like this is going to ensure that the user is authenticated before fetching their purchased courses. And next, into the try statement, we first make a connection to our database. Then we run a query to fetch the user ID using the provided username. And if no user is found, we are going to return an error. And then with the user ID in hand, we are going to query the purchased courses and courses table to get all of the courses that the user have purchased. And then the results are sent back to the user as a JSON response. And during this process, if there is error, we will catch it and we will log it into the console. And we will even send a message to the user saying error fetching purchased courses. And now let's set up the route for this functionality into the purchased course route file. First thing first, bring in the express router, purchased course controller, authenticate token. Then we create the purchased course route, which will have the authenticate token. Basically, it will first authenticate the user, and when authentication is done, it is going to call in the get purchased courses function present into the purchased controller file, purchased course controller file. Okay. And now in the server file, let's uncomment this out too, because we are done with this route also, and then save the file. And now we have to implement the store purchase functionality. So open the store purchase controller file present into the controllers folder, bring in the initialize connection function. Then we create a function named store purchase. It is an asynchronous function taking in the request and response. Then we extract the course ID from the request body and username from the request user object. And then we check if the course IDs is an array and if it contains any element. If not, we will return a 400 status with a message invalid course IDs. And then inside the try statement, we are going to initialize connection to the database. We query the database to fetch the user's ID, email based on the username. And if the user does not exist, we will return a 400 status with user does not exist message. Then we make a query to the database to fetch the IDs of the course user have already purchased. Then we filter out the courses that the user have already purchased from the course IDs array. And if there are no course to be purchased, we are going to return a 400 status with a message all courses have been already purchased. Then we create an array of values for the new course to be inserted into the purchased course table. And we also construct an SQL query to insert these values into the database. And after it, it is going to execute these SQL query to insert the new purchases into the database. If it is successful, we will return a 200 status with a message purchase stored successfully. And during this process, if any error occurs, we are going to log it into the console and return a status 500 with a message saying error storing purchase. And that is what we will have for this file. So let's now save the file, and now we will configure the route to handle storing purchase into the store purchase route file over here. So in this file, we bring in the express store purchase authenticate token at first. Then we define a post route for store purchase that utilizes the authenticate token middleware so that the only authenticate user can store their purchases. And at last, we export this route and then save the file. So we are also done with the store purchase controller and its route. So in the server file, let's undo this comment. Okay. And then save this file too. And now like this is the last route that we have to work with. So for it, open the video controller file, and in this file we bring in the client, Vimeo client from this services folder. And then we create an asynchronous function that is get video to get the Vimeo video for that particular course. So like in this function, we extract the video ID from the request parameter and make a request to Vimeo's API using the Vimeo client. If the request is successful, we will send back the video details into the response, but if there is any error, we are going to send a response of 500 with a proper error message. And now to make this video controller method accessible, let's create a route for this into the video routes file. So like in this video routes file, we bring in the express router video controller. Then we create and get route that uses the AuthenticateToken middleware. It is same thing as we did to the rest of the routes file. So like save the file, and in the server file, same thing, what we have to do, uncomment this route out. And that is it. Let's now save this file. And there we have it. We have successfully set up every controller routes for our backend. So now the time is that we test our application too, right? So let's do so. This is the client folder that we created in the last video. And in the terminal, we are going to navigate into the client folder, and then we will run the command npm run dev to start this application, and it is running on the port 5173, okay? Then over here, we will navigate to the registration form, and here we will register the user with the username, email and password. Then we will click on register, and you will see it gives us an alert that says registration successful. Then it is going to take us to this login form. So let's provide the username and the password and then click on login. And once it is done, it will navigate us to our blogs page where you can see all of the blogs that we created. And you can see the navigation links also changes from login and register. We got log out, okay? Then let's go to our console and check all of the process that will be happening now. In the purchased courses table, you can see that we do not have any purchased course as of now. So let's select the course that we are going to buy and then click on proceed to payment. It is then going to navigate us to the Stripe checkout page, and when you click on details, you will see the 2 courses that you are buying. Then here we will provide the email. In the card information, we will put the series of photo, then provide the rest of your card information, cardholder name, and then click on pay button. And once the payment was successful, it takes us to our successful page, okay? And then we are going to click on go to courses button, and in this purchased course array, you are going to see the message that says purchase stored successfully. And in the purchased course section, you will have the 2 courses that we bought, okay? And when we click on this, you will have this loading video message, then the video, and then the description of the course that we created into our database. And then if you click on this logout button, it is going to alert you saying, are you sure that you want to log out? If you select yes, you will be logged out of your account. So yes, that is what we are going to have for this video. And now I hope you enjoyed this video. So we created this project from the very start, creating the front end, then the database, and then the backend, right? So I hope you enjoyed this video and you found it useful. And if you did, then please do not forget to like and also subscribe. Also, if you have any doubts, please drop them into the comment section. I will be happy to help. You can even find the link for its GitHub. You can even find the link for this project's GitHub repository into the description, and I have also provided this project's documentation too, which is present on my website few.dev. You can even check that documentation if you want. So I will see you in the next video. Till then, bye bye and take care.